Sérgio was a man that had lived all over the world, but he was a Brazilian. It's a place where he was the sun, he was the man from Rio de Janeiro. He was anonymous. He could become himself. Sérgio had a well-worked tradition. Every time he would land in Rio de Janeiro, we would rush to Gilda's house, to his mother's house, drop the luggage, dash to the beach, to his favorite corner, run straight into the water, and the moment that he would go and put his head under the water and emerge up, he would say, yes, I have arrived.
So, what do you wish me to say?
No, you're going to speak to the people.
Really?
We're going to have 35 new staff members.
I see.
Where Gary is now. So.
I see. Some spontaneous wisdom.
Just how you came to be High Commissioner.
Oh my God, but you realize I can't summarize 34 years in 3 minutes. That's a huge theme. Because you're asking me to recount my life. But I suppose it's intended to be inspirational, right?
Absolutely.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sérgio Vieira de Mello. I'm Brazilian, and I'm presently United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. I joined the organization at the age of 21, believe it or not, just out of university. I was lucky to have served in East Pakistan, Cyprus, South America, Bosnia, Lebanon, Cambodia, Kosovo, and from there, East Timor. This organization is the best opportunity you have in your life of achieving your dreams. Never forget the real challenges and the real rewards of serving the United Nations are out there in the field, where people are suffering, where people need you.
Remember Rwanda or Kosovo, the UN didn't do its job. Will the United Nations serve the purpose of its founding? Or will it be irrelevant?
The President said last night that he is prepared to invade with or without the backing of the United Nations.
So President Bush made it clear, no time left for stately diplomatic waltzes at the United Nations. It's now the Texas two-step from here on out.
So we just met with the President and he explained the position of the United States, which I think you're all aware. I reminded him of the position of the Secretary General on this issue. I don't think anyone can predict what the human cost of such a war would be, but it will be high, by definition.
The conflict in Iraq and the removal of Saddam had been immensely controversial. It had been deeply opposed by many within the international community. It split the UN Security Council. So I thought it was particularly important that the UN were in a prime role.
The countries that had fought so fiercely over whether to go to war decided that they had to somehow kiss and make up. Let's agree that we all have an interest in seeing Iraq stabilized. Let's send a United Nations mission, and much more importantly, in a way, let's send the most charismatic, most experienced person in the entire system of conflict management, conflict prevention, nation building, refugee care, you name it. Let's send this guy who's known as a cross between James Bond and Bobby Kennedy. Let's send Sergio.
I asked him personally to take the job in Iraq. I said, you're the right person for this job, and I hope you'll do it.
President Bush, I know, had met him, and I think rated him very highly. And, you know, there was therefore a general consensus that if he could be persuaded to do it, he would be the right person.
He never wanted the job in Iraq. But That week, he called me to say that he had just received a phone call from New York where the Secretary General was asking him to go and see him. And I asked him, is that to talk about what? About Iraq? But you were already clear about your position vis-a-vis Iraq.
Sergio, with his friends, was absolutely adamantly saying, no way, forget it. Are you crazy? I've just got a new job, and here with Caroline, etc., etc. Gradually, the interest mounted and the pressures mounted, and he clearly became more interested and was finally influenced, I think, by the profile of the issue. It was the center stage of international UN action in 2003.
I have asked Mr. Sérgio de Mello to serve as my special representative. He will lead the UN effort in Iraq for the next 4 months.
He went to Iraq with a cadre of experts on constitutions, elections, policing, refugees, the best and brightest of the international community. He felt like he had all that he needed for success, and the way he defined success was a speedy end to the occupation and a smooth and peaceful transition to a brighter post-Saddam independent future.
We see our role as one that supports the Iraqis to replace as soon as possible the coalition and recover fully their sovereignty. No one likes to be under occupation. And I often ask myself, how would I feel if I saw foreign tanks in the streets of Rio de Janeiro, my hometown? I wouldn't like it. And I would want that to come to an end very, very quickly. And I would have wanted it not to happen in the first place.
Sérgio was exhausted. It was the month of August. It was extremely hot in Baghdad. We got up early. We met our other colleagues downstairs and then headed all together to the Canal Hotel.
Et donc il a déjeuné rapidement et il s'est levé. Donc le convoi était prêt à partir pour Canal Hotel. Et il avait un regard très, très évasif. Je le voyais et il était appuyé contre la vitre du véhicule. Il regardait à l'extérieur et vraiment, je le sentais pas bien. Pourquoi, je sais pas.
On August 19th, he was preparing to issue 2 statements, 2 open criticisms of the coalition for their excessive use of force. He knew the Americans would go nuts. And yet Sergio understood if he didn't take this step, the United Nations would continue more and more to just be seen as an accomplice of the United States.
Il avait rendez-vous avec Paul Bremer. Le convoi était prêt en bas. On était tous sur le point de départ vers 14 heures. On reçoit un appel du centre de commandement américain qui dit que le rendez-vous était annulé.
Unexpectedly, the meeting had been cancelled, so he ended up remaining in the office and called me in at lunchtime to have lunch with him. I told him that I was going to stay in and skip lunch and just work through. Then I knew that in the afternoon he was having another series of meetings and we were going to meet each other again.
He arrived in Baghdad that morning. It was a short initial trip to get a feel for the lay of the land, We went directly to the headquarters of the Coalition Provisional Authority and saw Paul Bremer. My abiding memory of the interview was that at the very end, he said, you know, the security situation is improving. In fact, it's in very good shape. From there, we went to the United Nations. We wanted to hear from Sergio what he thought the UN had been able to achieve. We were early for the meeting. Someone came and led us up. I think it was to the third floor, to Sergio's office.
Je lui ai fait un signe en disant que c'était OK. Donc il s'est levé et il est venu s'asseoir auprès des invités.
Sergio was at his desk and he was putting papers together, and then he came over to us and sat us down. I was sitting directly opposite him, just a couple of feet away.
I think we will be surprised at the high rate of casualties that you have, specifically with the unexploded ordnance. And in our landmine impact survey in the north, we found that 80...
Première chose que j'ai faite, c'est de voir si j'avais tous mes membres. Si j'étais blessé, j'entendais plus rien. Première chose, je me suis dit le patron. Voilà ce que j'ai dit.
When the explosion took place, I thought it was a mortar, which tells you that even after many years in Beirut, you still can be wrong on things.
When Ghassan stood up, he had some kind of very strange, a kind of smile that he's okay. And then immediately he said, let us go on to see what's happened to the people.
I took my telephone, took my necktie, my jacket, my laptop, my passport, and I went out and I discovered that a lot of people were shouting, crying, bleeding.
We could see blood everywhere, on the walls of the corridor. Bodies there, you don't know if they are alive or not. And things burning, the smell of burn, the smell of blood.
I stood up and I see Mona Rishmawen across from me, and I see her looking at me, and there's a drip of blood that is coming down her forehead.
And then I came to the first floor, and my husband was in the first floor. So I called him. I said, Andrew, Andrew, and miraculously he came out. I'll never forget this. And the moment he took my hand, Carolina said, Sergio, Sergio, Sergio. And she said, I have to find Sergio.
I started screaming. I cannot see anything because it's all dust. I couldn't see. I saw this light, this blinding light all around me. And suddenly the dust starts to settle. And I realized that this light is the sun. The sunlight of 4 p.m. Baghdad.
We were about 100 meters from the point of the blast, bent over to pick up the paperwork, And the next thing I knew, I saw this intensely bright flash, and I had about an eighth of a second to think, what the? And then when I woke up, I was lying across the room.
Minutes ago, an explosion ripped through a hotel in central Baghdad, the headquarters for the UN. An update live in Baghdad.
By far the most serious attack there's been since U.S. troops took Baghdad.
First this hour, terrorism in Baghdad. Right now, at least 14 people are dead, dozens more.
A bomb
wounded.
exploded directly below the office of its special representative here, Sérgio de Mello.
The UN has been there in what used to be the Canal Hotel since the early 1990s. 300 UN staff work inside. It's home to several UN humanitarian agencies, all working on the rebuilding of Iraq.
Je suis rentré, il y avait le petit Bonaventura, l'assistant, qui était mort. Je suis rentré dans le bureau de Jonathan. Rick était là, mort aussi. Et tout de suite, après le bureau de Jonathan, le vide. Plus de bureau. C'était... J'ai appelé Sérgio, et pas de réponse. Je suis sorti du bâtiment. J'ai contourné le bâtiment. Et je suis monté sur le gravat pour chercher Sérgio. Et avec moi, il y avait un Australien, Jeff, qui était l'attaché militaire de Sérgio.
I was calling out, stopping, listening. Move a meter, call out, stop, listen. There was this other fella who was running towards the rubble, who was in US military uniform. I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "My name's Bill."
The gentleman in a blue UN baseball cap came up, and he said something to the effect of like, "Where are the rest of you guys?" And I said, "There are no rest of our guys. It's me and a captain right now. I want to go in the building and do an internal reconnaissance and see." I must have been nuts to even think about going in the building. But firefighters have this thing, you know, we run into burning buildings when everybody else is running out of burning buildings. We made our way upstairs, and it was almost unrecognizable. I'd been up there on many occasions for meetings. As we walked along, I was looking, and at one point I found a little spot of light down below. If you looked in there, I could see two people.
The flash is what I remember. The ceiling collapsed, the floor collapsed. We were thrust down. I heard someone say, "Oh, shit," as if someone had expected it. I'm pretty sure it was Sérgio. And the next thing I remember is regaining consciousness and not being able to move. I remember looking up at someone who was wearing like a fireman's hat or helmet, and I sort of waved at him.
It may sound melodramatic, but honestly, from looking at it, I was pretty convinced that this was going to be a one-way trip. You know, I'd seen Oklahoma City, done enough collapse rescue stuff, and the building was still moving. You know, bricks were still falling. It was, you know, within a few minutes of the blast. I was kind of convinced this was a one-way trip, and I said, you know, tell my wife and my daughter I love them. I took my body armor off and started to climb down the hole. I got down to about where the first floor would be. At that point, I had to turn around in the space and basically slide down head first so I could get next to him. And fortunately, there was a piece of reinforcing rod, or rebar, that was sticking out of the concrete, and I put my shoulder up against that, and it was perfect where I could basically lean down and, you know, touch them. And that's when I first introduced myself, and I said, you know, my name is Bill. I'm a civilian EMT. I'm from the Army unit. I promise I'm going to get you guys out of here alive.
I remember saying my name to that person, telling them that my name was Gil. I remember very little else.
One gentleman said, my name is Gil, and he was directly in front of me. There was another gentleman, and he said his name was Sergio. As we're talking, you know, he starts to say, I thought he initially said, don't pull me out. And I said, don't worry, we're going to get you both out. I promise we'll get you both out. And he goes, no, no, don't let them pull the mission out. And at this point, I'm still not sure who he is. Then he's asking about, you know, the other people. How many people are killed? How many people are wounded? Do we know what happened? And suddenly I'm dawning on that this guy's somebody who's, you know, in charge. It's not just a worker. He's asking questions as the guy in charge. And it dawned on me, Jesus, this is Sérgio de Mello.
Ele tinha os dentes de leite tão perfeitos. Era uma criança feliz que ria sempre, sempre bem-humorado. Dia quente, toda casa que ele ia pediam para ele cantar. Quando ele tinha 3 anos, ele sabia cantar em 4 línguas. Fomos para Itália. Ele lá ficou num colégio de freiras.
Sérgio was the son of a Brazilian diplomat. So he spent most of his childhood years abroad, in Europe mainly, in Genoa, in Milan, in Rome, Naples, and even in Beirut. Through that vagabond life, this was just second nature to him. This capacity to just descend into a new place, kind of look around and say, okay, I'm home.
Até que ele foi para o colégio francês. Ele fez a Sorbonne, fez filosofia.
He became activated politically, partly by the philosophy and mainly by what was going on the campus of the Sorbonne at that time. It was 1968. War in Vietnam was raging. Students and workers throughout France were striking. And of course, in May of '68, the students ended up effectively taking over the campus. Sérgio manned the barricades, threw stones at the police. What's amazing about his politics in those days is how dogmatic he is, how virulent his anti-Americanism, his anti-imperialism, even his Marxism or neo-Marxism is. I mean, he is a revolutionary to the core. He graduated from the Sorbonne in 1969. One of his best friends lived in Geneva, and Sérgio, looking for work, went and crashed at his place. Got some interviews with international organizations, and ended up at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
Those of us who joined in the 70s really worked on third world issues. It was well regarded, it was expanding rapidly, it had an interesting mandate of not just aid but also protection. It was politically very active in the sense that it's on hot borders and conflict areas.
The turning point of Sérgio's relationship to his new place of employment was his first field mission, which was in Bangladesh. Here, Sérgio is tasked as a very young man to help provide shelter, to help provide food, to try to come up with some kind of political strategy by which these people could eventually return to their homes. He discovered himself. He suddenly saw extreme poverty, enormous refugee flows, and the ideals that had motivated him took life. They took flesh. He realized that he was not merely a man of thought, but that if he wanted to make those ideals real, he had to be a man of action.
I met Sergio first time, actually, in Swaziland in 1976 to move the Soweto kids who'd been attacked by the South African police out of Swaziland to Tanzania. This was a very hot operation, as you can imagine. The South African security were all over the place. But we evacuated them through Mozambique. Sergio was the acting UNHCR person in Maputo.
I met Sérgio Vieira de Mello in Cambodia and Thailand when the Khmer Rouge were driven out of power and a massive refugee crisis ensued. This is what brought a whole generation of people into the international humanitarian effort.
You're a better agronomist than I am.
Sergio was the most dazzling, charismatic person in that area.
I better not shower here.
How could a guy this charismatic, this good-looking, be doing this kind of work?
He was one of the bright stars, no question, probably maybe the brightest. He was the master magician, mediator, manager, massager of egos.
Would you mind spelling your last name? Vieira-Demelo.
The mission was to return between 350 and 400,000 refugees who were primarily living on the borders with Thailand in refugee camps for a prolonged period of time already, to return them ahead of the elections that were scheduled to take place. Sergio was convinced that the only way to make the repatriation a success was to work with the Khmer Rouge. But this was controversial because they were what they were. Their senior leadership had been part of a genocidal regime.
He had a long fascination with evil genius, the mind of evil men and how they functioned and why, especially intellectual evil, as the Khmer Rouge were. There was no question it was high risk and shouldn't have happened.
It was all done in a bit of an unorthodox way. There was a meeting place which was in the middle of nowhere. We had no idea where we were going. I remember Sergio's driver declared him basically insane. We had to walk through minefields. There was no radio contact. And it was an hour and a half by tractor trailer to a minuscule kind of settlement headquarters. We spent the rest of the day there in the evening and had discussions with them about the land and where people could return. It was just an extraordinary experience. Sergio never underestimated, of course, who he was dealing with and what their historical baggage was, but that did not cause him to think that he shouldn't talk to them. He wasn't a black or white kind of guy.
War Criminals, My Friends, was what his autobiography could have been called. He was rather inclined to see a broader view, perhaps, than many of us would. I would be the dogmatic human rights approach that these guys are war criminals and should be put on trial immediately. He told me to stop, get off my high horse.
I think it was a breakthrough. It was the first time that the UN, and probably foreigners for that matter, were in touch with the official Khmer governing structure.
Sergio managed to convince at least some leading members of the Khmer Rouge that cooperation with the international community was a more constructive approach and more in their self-interest than sabotage. More tangibly, he managed to produce one of the few concrete successes of a long international and a very expensive international engagement in Cambodia. The return of 400,000 Cambodians to their homes.
I think there was a huge sense of being vindicated. I think you can almost see a sense of satisfaction on his face that they're able to take their destiny in their own hands.
May they be blessed with happiness, lasting peace, and prosperity. We are all here betting on peace. We will, as from this morning, and with deep emotion, escort you home. Thank you.
From that point forward, he wasn't just a UN success story or a humanitarian success story. He was an individual that governments thought about as a problem solver, as a troubleshooter, as a go-to guy, as someone that you could put into harm's way, have talked to the world's most dangerous people, and he could somehow pull rabbits out of the hat.
Eu já olhava ele como 007, não morre. Eu perguntei a ele, Sérgio, por que você vai para esses países, para esses que estão em conflitos perigosos? Aí ele ria e não respondia.
It sounded to me like a 500-pound bomb had gone off, and very close. I went down one knee, and when I stood back up again, I looked at my first sergeant and I said, let's go. Let's get in the truck.
My driver said, where to go? So you see the smoke? Follow the smoke. My philosophy of the UN was not 100%. The UN believes a lot of talking will solve all the problems, and they don't. Sometimes you need to have brute force. On that day, it didn't make any difference. There were people there that needed our help, and my job was to accomplish that.
I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Mass chaos. Wounded people everywhere. I saw one man, he had a piece of rebar that was stuck through his cheeks, and he was sitting there smoking a cigarette. Absolute insanity. Time was our enemy. We needed to start moving people.
It looked like a car bomb came in, and it was setting off all the other vehicles that were next to it. We had people that were crawling out of the building. So I said, okay, I'll take control of this. This little section, this little island, Dirt Island, is going to be our triage and staging area right now. We had to make decisions on who was going to live and who was going to die.
One of the things we have in the civilian medical world is called the golden hour. Basically, if you can get somebody to a trauma center within 60 minutes from injury, if you can get them there alive, they have a pretty good chance of surviving, at least in the Western world. At this point, I don't hear anybody calling. It's just this quiet little womb in there. It's hotter than you know what. Both men were covered in brick and debris from the waist down. Sergio was actually more almost chest high. You couldn't see that anything was broken or out of place, but he was covered completely. They both had severe lower extremity injuries. Gil's, you could see his left leg was folded up. Sergio, you presume he's got that much weight on him, he's got crush injuries. I was able to start an IV on Gil Loescher. I could not get to Sergio de Mello well enough to get an IV going. I just physically couldn't get in there without lying on top of Gil. I knew we had no heavy equipment, so I knew the only way we were going to get these guys out is the old-fashioned way. So I started taking bricks, you know, a couple of bricks at a time, throwing them up on the opening, go back down and get a couple more bricks, and just to try to get these guys uncovered.
We saw about 185 people, and we moved 130 of them in 55 minutes in whatever vehicle we could find, deuce and a half, 5 tons, pickup trucks.
Security units were arriving at this point, and they set up a 360-degree security perimeter on the outside.
Sir, I need you to back up.
We then set to work searching the building and looking for survivors.
Probably about an hour or so down the line, I heard a cry that there's more people up here. So I said, okay, I'm going upstairs to check. I went floor to floor, room to room, till I got to the top floor, and I heard another cry there, and that's where I met Bill.
About 40 minutes after I arrived, I hear somebody yelling from up above, and the guy goes, "Do you need any help?" And the last thing I wanted was somebody who had no training down there, going to make more problems, knock more bricks down. And I said, "Do you have any experience?" And he said, "I'm a New York City firefighter paramedic." And I said, "Come on down."
I looked at the hole, and I just said, holy crap.
Here would be the third floor, looking at it from the side. When it collapsed, the roof basically went. Sergio's office would have been somewhere in here. The second floor had collapsed partially down. They were basically here. Their heads were down. Now they would be next to each other. So this would, let's say, be Gil Loescher here in his feet. To his right, behind him on that diagram, Sergio would be basically in the same position. Several bodies were actually located in this area over here. That were the other people that were in the meeting. We treat everybody in EMS the same. If I could have gotten Sergio out first, would I? All things being equal, maybe. But if it could have been the President of the United States, and I would have had to get Gil Loescher out first, physically to get room to pull Sergio out.
I said, let me go down. You're already gone to your turn.
My little one-man hole in the ground became a two-man hole in the ground. And we spent the next 2 or 3 hours working together like a team, trying to get these guys out of there.
I had to climb over 2 victims. First victim was a female. She had this side of her face covered with a concrete slab. She had what we call agonal breaths, but she still had a pulse. She had a real severe head injury. I knew she wasn't going to be survivable. I told her to hang on, and I said, keep your faith. And I said that God is with you. And she squeezed my hand. So I'm assuming, because in the medical community, the last thing that goes is your hearing. So I really believe the lady heard me. I quietly pray, and I tell him Jesus loves you. I do that automatically. Some of my coworkers think I'm crazy, but, you know, that's who I am. I continue to go down. I finally got down to the bottom of the first floor. And I heard 2 people that were talking, and one was Sergio. He was to the left of me, and Gil was more or less straight right in front of me. He was conscious. He knew what was going on. He knew what happened. He knew where he was. He knew his name. He knew how old he was and where he was from. And he told me he was from Oxford, England. He was an American working there.
I'm told that I was conscious for most of that time, but I don't remember.
I told him, I'm going to continue to work while you talk. He was telling me about his family, his wife, and his 2 lovely daughters. I said, this is my promise to you. I will get you out here alive if you stay with me.
La terre était brûlante. Brûlante due au blast. Et on a creusé avec les mains. Car quand on a commencé, on n'avait pas de pelle, on n'avait aucun outil pour creuser. Donc on était obligé de... Et on a appelé, on appelait, on appelait.
My memory was of dirt. I was surprised about how much dirt there was. I remember thinking, I'm going to move a piece of rubble and he will be there. I then saw a slit. I put my head in and called out again, and it was Sergio. I just felt wonderful. He was alive, and we'd found him.
We found a hole through which we were communicating. Sérgio! Sérgio! In French, tiens bon, we will come and help you, don't worry.
His first questions of me, after I'd asked of him, were concern for others in the team, not of himself or of his circumstances. Where is Carolina? Where are the others? Please look for them. Don't stop.
I was not aware that there were people still working outside at the base of the opening. I didn't hear anybody. At this point, I was able to yell out one of my sergeants. I said, Robbie, I need a rope. I need something to haul this stuff out. I need lights. I never saw any equipment because he was a buck sergeant, and as he came through, now as more and more people are showing up from the Army, higher ranking, it was like, hey, we need that rope. You know, captain would say, give me the rope. And he'd say, well, I need it from my first sergeant. I'm a captain. Give me the rope. You know, I need this. I'm a colonel. Give me. Never got any of that stuff. At that point, both of them were lucid, conscious. I'm just trying to keep them talking.
What I was taught was to get their minds off their injuries. The survival rate is greater when we get their mind off of what's going on at that time. Kind of put them in another area in their life, get their mind away from Baghdad.
A seminal moment in Sergio's life came when East Timor was cut loose from Indonesia after tremendous fighting and genocide. We needed a senior UN official to be, in effect, the president, the power, in an area which was no longer part of Indonesia and not yet an independent country. Sérgio Vieira de Mello had the drive, the leadership, and the skills to do it, and it was the biggest test the UN had ever faced in the nation-building phase.
I had never heard of Timor in my life. When I was proposed to go there, I couldn't in a million years have placed it on the map. I was an economics officer working in establishing the transitional structure of the new government. I didn't know Sérgio Vieira de Mello from Brazil. My part of the government knew him as the SRSG, the Special Representative of the Secretary General. One morning, I was running along the beach road. I saw this man running with someone else who looked like a bodyguard. He passed by, and I looked at, I looked at the two, and I realized this is the SRSG. And I'm looking at him and thinking, well, I am a woman, here I am running on my own. Why does he need a bodyguard next to him? What a chicken.
The two men who hold East Timor's immediate future in their hands enjoy another rapturous welcome in an East Timorese town. On this day, Xanana Gusmao has been crowned king of the Amera Regency. By his side is the man with the real power in East Timor today. Sérgio de Mello is East Timor's legal leader for the next 2 years, as it makes its transition to full independence.
Here, Sérgio, a guy who, in his early 20s, had preached against imperialism, had thrown stones at Parisian police, and suddenly he was in charge. He was the viceroy.
The United Nations gave Sérgio all the powers of a dictator, but he never dictated anything. He set up a consultative council that included the top East Timorese leaders, and later a cabinet which included the East Timorese leaders. And he never took a decision that the East Timorese disagreed with.
East Timor will have an elected representative body working for the people to frame a constitution that is of the people. This is a momentous achievement. Democracy looks to be in a very healthy state indeed.
The real first time when I talked to Sérgio was at a formal dinner. I arrived very early, and it turned out that the only person who was there, the first person who was there, was Sérgio. No one else was there, so we started chatting away. He told me that he knew I was from Argentina and that he had spent the first days of his life in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And I was surprised to hear that. As he was telling me this, he was drifting away in memories until everyone suddenly arrived and our conversation was cut short. It was that time, it was that day that we had really, established a connection and liked each other. He had told me he was separated, and I assumed that was a legal separation. It was later on that he told me that he was not legally separated. But I must say that at the beginning he was not, 100% clear from that.
Sérgio had gotten married very young to Annie, and I don't think when he had his two sons that he would have forecast that so much of his life would be spent away from his home in France. He was never a terribly faithful husband. He had relationships outside his marriage, a couple of which were very, very public. In Cambodia, he had lived with his girlfriend and worked with her in the mission.
It was clear to everybody with whom we worked that we had a relationship. It was for me very difficult because he was married and we were clearly serious. I never met his wife, but I'm sure she knew.
Sérgio had an eye for women and enjoyed their company a lot.
It didn't last, but we stayed in touch and through friends, mutual friends. Then I remember receiving an email from him that he sent to his closest friends just before he left for Iraq. He said, I'm so happy that I'm moving into a phase in my life where I'm starting to have a personal life and I'm looking forward. This is going to be my last assignment. And then I want to have a more normal lifestyle and start with Carolina. What I remember from that email was that he was ready to settle down and start enjoying life.
With Carolina, he was saying, this is the woman I'm going to marry. He was wearing a ring with her name on it. She was wearing a ring with his name on it. He started legal proceedings to end his marriage and with the thought of beginning a new life with Carolina.
He really wanted to have a second chance at having a family.
I think he did regret not having spent more time with his sons. On the other hand, it didn't change his behavior. I mean, he felt drawn intellectually and emotionally to the work he was doing. He was ambitious. His career was very important to him. And I think he also felt that he was doing good. In that scheme of things, spending time with his sons ended up being less important. But the truth is that had he been a family man, he could not have accomplished what he accomplished.
All of a sudden, things just started falling into place. Yes, independence will take place, and yes, and we are in love, and life cannot be better than life at that moment in time.
It was his success in East Timor that proved that he was at a unique level. He inherited this war-torn, genocide-torn half an island, had presided over it, built it up, and handed it off as an independent country.
After the ceremony is finished, Several parties were taking place. The president of the World Bank was toasting with President Clinton, and many heads of state were in town. He told me, Carolina, I don't want to go to any party. I just want for the two of us to be together, and let's do our own thing. Why don't we go for a run? As we were running along, the Timorese were recognizing him. They were saying, oh, look, here he goes. I could see Sérgio smiling from ear to ear, waving his hand to the people, you know, as if he was waving bye-bye to his team. And many times afterwards, he will bring me back to that moment. He would take me back to that moment. Tell me, you remember that night when we went running, the days of independence? Didn't it feel good? Didn't we do the right thing?
ولننظر إلى موقف الغرب وإلى موقف الأمم المتحدة في أحداث إندونيسيا عندما تحركوا لتقسيم أكبر دولة في العالم الإسلامي من حيث عدد السكان.
Osama bin Laden had issued a statement saying that jihadis all over the world should take up arms not only against the United States, but against the United Nations.
فلا يذهب إليها مسلم بحال من الأحوال ولا يذهب إليها عاقل وإنما.
And the grounds for that appeal was that the United Nations had helped dismember Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, and that it had pried away East Timor from this Muslim motherland, Indonesia. And bin Laden was sending the signal, the UN is a target.
It's an unusual thing for the United Nations to be targeted when our objective in that country, I think, which should be recognized by all, is to just help Iraqis get back on their feet.
A special representative by the UN, Sérgio Mello, was there in the compound when this truck bomb detonated right below his window. We still don't have any confirmation about the extent of the injuries. We're still searching out more information about that.
I told ranking officers, I said, get me the heavy equipment, bulldozers, cranes, just find me anything.
Finally, somebody threw down a woman's purse, and it was tied with a string which looked like the kind of cord that you use on a set of drapes that they had tied together, and that became what we used to haul the bricks up. So I'd fill it with a half a dozen bricks, and these guys would haul it up to the third floor and throw it somewhere, and they'd drop it back down, and we'd throw a few more bricks in. And this just kept going on and on.
That went on for hours until there was enough room for me to move Gil or Sérgio a little bit out of the way. Sérgio did move a little bit, but every time I moved him, he was in agony. And every time I moved him, the dirt and the walls were shifting. So I really had no means of supporting the walls up because I didn't have 2x4s or 4x4s or anything like that. But this stuff didn't come fast enough.
There was no unity of command, no unity of effort. Basically, you know, fire service in America, Canada, Western Europe, they're going to have shoring equipment. They're going to have things that we can use to stabilize the building to get them out. We had nothing but our hands, a lady's purse, and a string.
At the base of the rubble pile, there were a couple people milling around. One was a female. She was missing a shoe. She had a torn dress. I don't know what language she was speaking, to be quite honest with you, but it was in English. She was told on a number of occasions to go to the casualty collection point, but she kept milling around.
I tell the soldiers, come on, you know, help me, let's get him out. Let's get some shovels and start taking the debris out. And he tells me, there are no shovels. Well, okay, so let's do it, you know, with this piece of steel. I said, no. We need to wait for equipment to come. But where is equipment? Who the hell is in charge?
I got a phone call saying that Sergio de Mello had perhaps been very seriously wounded, that he was trapped, and that they didn't know how serious the situation was. But then a few minutes later, someone said, well, no, he'd been speaking and had been talking to people outside the building. And I remember just a sense of relief that perhaps this was all right.
The president called. He said, well, please find out what happened. And my chief of staff pulled me aside and he said, we don't know what's happened with Sergio. The last we heard, he was alive, but, you know, we just don't know what's going on. He's trapped somewhere in the rubble.
A short time ago, I spoke with Ambassador Bremer, directed him to provide all possible assistance to the rescue and recovery effort at the United Nations headquarters.
You ask questions or you want to hear from me? Both. Yeah?
The president immediately took to him. He was elegant. He was committed. He drew you in the conversation with him. You just knew that this was somebody who could command a room.
Señor Secretario General, distinguidos miembros del Consejo, amigos, creo que tenemos razones para ser optimistas sobre el futuro de Irak, pero tenemos poco margen de error. The United Nations presence in Iraq remains vulnerable to any who would seek to target our organization. Our security continues to rely significantly on the reputation of the United Nations, our ability to demonstrate meaningfully that we are in Iraq to assist its people and our independence.
Sergio hadn't wanted to go to Iraq in any deep way. I mean, he liked being at the center of the action, always. He liked being the center of attention, always. But he was beginning to build a new life with Carolina and exhausted from East Timor, coupled with the fact that he opposed the war in Iraq to begin with. But as soon as the question was posed, Sergio did not feel like he could say no, and of course tried to make the best of not an ideal situation.
I never forget him writing his speech for his landing in Baghdad. I think he didn't have the press that he expected because Bremer had called a press conference for his own at the same time, so that sort of sabotaged it a little bit. But he was pretty aware of a historic event, and I think also pretty aware that he had an awful mandate from the Security Council. It wasn't a political management mission. It wasn't a humanitarian mission. It was a compromise mission under the U.S. occupation. But if anyone could have achieved something in that political hodgepodge mess of a situation, it would have been Sergio.
Hi.
The first thing he wanted to do is to listen. He went to Basra, Mosul, Erbil, all over. He was very attentive to how normal Iraqis were living day by day. Water, electricity. He saw it very much of a question of human dignity.
What I do? If I don't have money, what I do? I stole, became a thief?
No, don't.
No, I
understand.
I am graduated from university.
Oh, he didn't know much, but he did not pretend to know much. That was something that you'd immediately like about him, that he was willing to listen, to learn. We had an advantage. Everybody is, in principle, willing to talk to us, which was not the case with the Americans.
I am here to listen to you. I am here to learn. Tell me, frankly, how you believe the United Nations, myself and my colleagues can be helpful to you. Shukran jazeelan.
Sergio worked non-stop. He was eternally optimistic that he and his team, single-handedly and perhaps naively could turn the tables around.
We've had a very good first meeting with Mr. de Mello here, going over a very wide range of issues on which we can work together to help in our common objective, which is producing an independent, democratic, peaceful Iraq. And I think we have a very good sense.
Sergio saw nothing incompatible with trying to help the UN by helping the Iraqis, which in turn would help the United States.
There wasn't any press briefing foreseen in our program.
He was not an accomplice to the terrible mistakes of the Bush administration. He was doing what he could for the Iraqi people. And in typical Sergio fashion, he was paying too little attention to the fact that he was at great personal risk, precisely because the more effective he was, the more he'd be perceived by the enemies of the U.S. as serving American interests.
Mr. Mello, is there a real role to the United Nations in political process in Iraq, or it's just a cover to the American occupation?
Thank you. First of all, my friend, in answering your second question, the UN, its Secretary General, and Sérgio Vieira de Mello, representative of the Secretary General, are no tool and no cover for anyone. All right? We are an independent organization. Secretary General Kofi Annan and myself are independent from anyone. So don't suggest for a second that we're there supporting the United States or the coalition. All right?
Once in the street, there were small pieces of paper in blue, like square ones in blue, that says Al-Qaeda is now here or something like that.
Someone had been reportedly seen taking down the numbers of the license plates of cars coming in and out of the compound.
As an anti-terrorism specialist, I try to look at it from the terrorist point of view. And I was thinking that, if I was a terrorist, it would be so easy to drive a truck loaded with explosives down the driveway and detonate it right next to the UN and blow it up. I recommended strongly that they put in a large reinforced gate at the entrance to Canal Road driveway. But it was a very busy road, and they were concerned that traffic trying to get into the parking lot would queue up and they'd have accidents and it would just be a mess. And I reported back that I thought, it'd be better to have a few fender bender accidents than have somebody drive a truck up the driveway and blow up the building. In lieu of the gate that I had recommended, the 2nd Cavalry had supplied them with a Bradley armored fighting vehicle and a crew. And they were basically the valet parking. Later on, I noticed the vehicle was gone. And there was nothing there except a roll of concertina wire across the driveway. And I was like, uh-oh. When I spoke to somebody at the UN, I said, what happened to it? And they said, oh, Sergio ordered it moved. I'm like, oh, geez. He was trying to tone down the American presence at the UN compound. So it didn't look like the UN was, part of the coalition forces.
هذه المنظمة منظمة يسيطر عليها اليهود والأمريكان، وهذه جرائمها واضحة في العالم الإسلامي. كان بهذيك الفترة أبو مصعب محتاج للقوة البشرية وللقوة المادية، وكان محتاج لضرب أهداف مثل هاي حتى يشتت الشرعية الدولية. قاموا بضرب هذا المبنى بسبب أنه هذا المبنى كان موكر للاستخبارات والمخابرات الأمريكية والعالمية للقوة البشرية وللقوة المادية. الشغلة الثالثة قتل هذا المجرم سيرجيو.
On that Monday, he told me that he really needed something to look on to the future. We needed to get going and start planning immediately on our next steps, our next move. And really our next move had been to go back to Brazil. Monday night, he said, Carolina, let's book the flights and make sure that we have a clear exit strategy, because I need to be thinking that I'm going back to Brazil, I'm going back to Rio. We were 6 weeks away from leaving Baghdad.
They say time flies when you're having fun. Well, I certainly wasn't having fun, but time was flying. In the golden hour, it came and went. We didn't even realize it.
I'm tired. My legs and arms were cramping.
We were driven, basically. We were determined that these guys were not going to die in this hole.
I tried to get them into their, what I felt was their religious belief.
At one point, Andre wanted to pray with Sergio, and he was still lucid enough to say, F prayers, you know, this is not the time, which I think kind of upset Andre a little bit.
I asked him, you know, you got to have faith. You have to believe. And it says, believe, damn God did this to me, you know, curse God. And he was using some other words that I will not say. And I was trying to tell him, God didn't do this to you, man. You have to have faith this strong to believe that God could get you out of here. I'm your savior, in the sense. You have to believe in me.
I've never had that experience. In 35 years, nobody's ever said, hey, let's stop and pray.
What's so wrong with praying with somebody? You know, it didn't, it wouldn't have hurt.
And Sergio wanted no part of that. So, you know, and he was expletive deleted. No, you know, he didn't want any part of that. I'm not a big prayer guy either. I was like, I don't know if I tactfully or untactfully said, we haven't got time for this shit. Prayer's great. We'll pray when we get him out. But let's get him out.
There are some soldiers who tell me to clear the area. I said, no, I'm going there because I hear that Sérgio is there. And the soldier comes to me and says, no, you know, you have to clear the area, you have to step back. And I said, no.
After a period of time, I started to figure out that maybe there was something going on between her and somebody in there. She was close with him or something. I don't know. I could see she wanted to get up. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, you know what? Let them talk to each other. I gave her my hand. I let her come up. She put her head in the hole and started talking.
I put my ear and my mouth very close to the hole, and I say, Sérgio, ¿estás ahí? Sérgio, are you there? And a very weak voice says, Carolina, my love, I'm in pain, I'm here. I love you. And I tell him I love him too. To be strong. And I'm going to get him out.
At this point, Gil is reacting to some verbal stimuli, but not much. You can't get really more than a word or two in reply. We got to get him out. We know we got to get him out. We got to get him out now. But the problem is he's still pinned from his lower legs.
Where Sergio was, Gil had to be removed first. I said, buddy, you know, I've done the best I can, and if I don't get you out now, we're never going to get out. So he said, do what you have to do, and I just want to live, and I want to go home.
My memory of it is that, you know, I'm just not going to give in. I'm not going to die. I have a lot to live for. You know, I thought immediately of my family.
A decision was made, and we all agreed on it, and the most important thing was Gil was ready for it. The only thing they found me was an old rusty wood saw and my trusty paramedic scissors. I said, I'm going to start sawing away. If you have to scream out, scream out. If the pain is unbearable, let me know and I will stop and give you some more pain medicine.
I don't remember any of that. I've blacked that out.
I started to cut through his first leg. I had to kind of separate his screaming from what I had to do because I knew it had to be done.
Even with morphine, even being deeply in shock and basically reacting only to pain, it was pretty gruesome work. He screamed. I mean, you probably could have heard the screams in, the green zone. We felt terrible, but we knew if we didn't do this, he would die where he was because we physically couldn't get him out.
I pulled tighter on the tourniquet, and I told him I'm going to go to the second leg. He didn't answer for a while, for a few minutes. I thought I lost him. What I believe happened was the pain was so bad that it literally just knocked him out. So in a way, that was probably a blessing. I started to cut into the second leg, and he woke up again, and he started to moan, and he just said, "Andre, I feel that, but go ahead and do it and finish." And I did. I finished cutting the second leg, pulled tighter on the tourniquet, and I bandaged it.
We finally got SCED. It's an acronym for something, and I have no idea what it is, but it's this plastic roll-up thing that when you unroll it and lace the sides, it forms a semi-rigid stretcher.
I got him in the best I can, and the team up on top was just waiting on me to say, go ahead and go. They pulled, and they pulled, and they pulled.
The reinforcing rod was blocking one part of the small opening, and the body was blocking the other. We tried to pull the SCED past it. It wouldn't fit. Since we never got the hacksaw, we couldn't move the reinforcing rod. So the only other way to get Gil up was to remove the body that was pinned in the rubble partway up. So I had the unenviable task of using my combat knife again to cut the body in half so they could haul it. And if you think cutting a leg off was fun, now even though the victim was dead and obviously deceased, it was still hard work.
And they finally got Gil up. I looked at him and I said, "Gil, you're free. You're home now. I'm going to give you to my other guys and they will take you to the doctors."
My family is my anchor. I probably knew instinctively that if I got out of there, that they would see me through my recovery.
He was close to death when they got him out there. His vital signs were like 60/40 for blood pressure. And they did a hot load into one of the medevac helicopters and flew him away.
I spotted this man. I rushed to him and I asked him, "Please, I need your help. I need your help. My Sérgio is in the rubble and he is going to die if we don't help him out." He told me, "I have news for you. Do you see that helicopter, that Black Hawk that just left off?" And I said, yes. That is passing by now. That's probably the helicopter with him. But I have bad news for you. You have to be strong. To free him up, we had to cut his legs. And he's in a very bad shape. One of his arms is also in very bad shape. I said, "Okay, it's okay, it doesn't matter. Is he alive? I don't care about his legs. Is he alive?" Yes.
His mind was starting to go. He wasn't talking much anymore. You could hear his breathing was a lot more erratic and irregular and stuff. And I just went over there and I continued to encourage him. I tried to hold his hand, lay next to him and put my head on him so he'll know that somebody was there.
I went back over to talk to Sérgio, tell him we'll get you out next. He didn't reply to me. Shook him, he didn't reply to me. Felt for a pulse, and there wasn't one. We weren't going to get him out. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks.
I felt there is something wrong. I know there's something wrong. I hear on the back someone saying, Sergio's dead. Sergio's dead. No. No. I want to die.
He failed me. He really failed me. I really believe God sent two miracles, Bill and myself. We were his angels, and he failed both of us. And it hurt real bad. I'm mad at him, but I'm also hurt for him because he didn't believe in me. He didn't believe in a miracle. We only asked him to stay alive, have the will to survive, have the faith to survive, and he didn't want to.
Maybe he's misconstruing where he's saying, you know, basically, don't worry about me, get everybody else out first. Maybe he's construing that as not a will to live. I look at that as being pretty selfless. I don't think that's a lack of will to live. I think that's, you know, I think that's a pretty damn good thing. I told him, I promise I'm going to get you out. And I didn't. I felt almost like he knew I lied to him. To this day, it's probably the thing that bothers me the most is that I truly felt that I'd get both of these guys out alive.
A soldier covered with sweat and dirt came over. He said, Mr. Ambassador, I'm very sorry. We tried to save Sergio, but he's dead. Now the press were clamoring for an interview. I could not say that I knew Sergio was dead because I couldn't have his family find out by my making a statement on television. So I basically lied.
Excuse me, sir. Sergio Vieira de Mello is apparently also has been injured in this attack.
Yes, that's right. As of this time, my dear friend Sergio is somewhere back there. It may well be that he was the target of this attack. The truck was parked in such a place here in front of the building that it had to affect his office, which was the second floor above us here.
What strikes me about the rescue is just the utter indignity of Sergio being left under the rubble for 3.5 hours, for them to be relying upon a lady's handbag and a curtain rope? Are we kidding? This is the United States. And the degree to which the political planners of this war failed not only Sergio and the UN officials and others who were killed that day, but also their own soldiers who put their lives on the line in that way. Terrible. Terrible.
He was lying on his flag in the rubble, the United Nations flag. The team above then pulled, and slowly we were able to take him up the shaft. Gabby was up there, and some of his other bodyguards, and they took one of the stretchers and laid him on it. Sorry.
Le poser sur la civière. Quand on le regarde, on se dit tout ce qu'il a fait dans le monde pour ça. On comprend pas.
And we were standing up there in the second floor, and the body came. And he was put on and I recognized him. His face was entirely intact. And he looked handsome, as usual, I remember.
Mais tarde, recebi telefonema que ele tinha morrido. Tive vontade de chorar, de gritar, mas minha avó estava aqui e ela não sabia de nada. Me controlei o que pude. Fui para o quarto e lá chorei um pouco e me concentrei e voltei para cuidar dela.
Foi o dia que o mundo desabou na minha cabeça. Ter um filho como eu tive, com tantos predicados tão bom, e acabar assim. A falta que ele me faz é imensa.
Non, je veux pas dire que je suis sorti du tunnel, mais je fais ma route. Et bien souvent, je vais au cimetière des rois, là où repose Sergio, et de temps en temps, je vais parler avec Sergio. Voilà, maintenant, il est là-haut, en train de sauver des gens encore, certainement. Je sais qu'un jour, je le retrouverai. J'en veux beaucoup aux gens qui ont fait ça. Beaucoup. Beaucoup.
I was really impressed with his stoicism. Never asked about himself. He asked about others, you know. Never asked for anything for himself in the way of pain medicine. He was always asking, take care of the others. And I thought somebody should know that. I didn't know who to contact. I didn't know where he was from. I just knew his boss was Kofi Annan. So that night on my broken and battered little laptop computer, I wrote a letter to Kofi Annan. 19 August 2003. You know I'm not going to get through this. Subject, Sergio Vieira de Mello. As you are painfully aware, at approximately 16:30 today local time, a horrible disaster occurred at the UN headquarters in Baghdad. I was the first U.S. soldier to arrive on the scene, and the sight was catastrophic. Unfortunately, Mr. de Mello passed away. While there is no good way to die, it says a lot about a man's character when his last thoughts are for his family, his co-workers, and his country, or in this case, the UN. I'm truly sorry we could not have kept our promise to get him out alive. The UN is fortunate to have people of this caliber working for them. I salute all of them and hope that your mission in Iraq will conclude successfully. Mr. de Mello was a humanitarian of the first order. He will be hard to be replaced.
Today we share our shock and sorrow at the loss of people we loved. All of them leave a huge void. Raid, Lin, Isan, Imad, and Basim. Rahim, Ranilo, Rick, Riza, Jean-Celine, Christopher, Martha, Fiona, Nadia. Finally, Sérgio, my dear friend. Why did you never seem tired while even working 18-hour days? Why did you never look crumpled even after an 18-hour flight? Why were you never sick? Why were you never grumpy? And you were the only top official in the UN known to everyone by his first name. Even to those who didn't know you personally, you were always just Sérgio.
It is heartening that around the world, whether in the United Nations missions or in humanitarian organizations or in governments, you do have individuals who ask themselves, what would Sérgio do? The one answer that they know he would give is get out of the capital and go out into the world and figure out what's happening. Figure out what's making people tick. Respect the dignity of the human beings whose lives are at stake here. Don't treat them as a monolith or as a mass. Engage the bad guys. Be a man of action, but also never stop being a man of reflection.
I wish I could have an elastic time to be able to go back to the past and stretch out some special moments to a maximum. Now being aware that those times are finished and they won't happen again. When I finally made it back to Brazil, I went to the spot where we would always arrive every time we would hit the ground in Brazil and go straight into the water at the sea. I really felt the strength of his spirit and the kindness of his spirit were right there. That's where I feel that Sérgio is now. And where I feel that he really, really rests forever.
My message is very simple. Never forget the real challenges and the real rewards of serving the United Nations are out there in the field, where people are suffering, where people need you. So good luck, welcome to the organization, and here we are to help you in any way we can. All the best. Okay.